Request to delay the trial of former Congressman Jeff Fortenberry.
His attorneys hope the Department of Justice, under the incoming leadership of President-elect Trump, would reconsider the case. 2 years ago, Fortenberry resigned after he was found guilty of lying to the FBI about illegal campaign contributions. The Court of Appeals tossed his conviction in California, not because of the evidence, but because of where the trial was held.